You're watching Northern Crimes.
It's a bitter winter night in the Pacific Northwest. Temperatures hover just above freezing. Frost settles on the evergreen branches that stretch for miles across the northern landscape. In small towns, in rural communities scattered throughout Washington, British Columbia, and Montana, families are settling in for the evening, unaware that darkness is already moving among them. The harsh northern terrain has always harbored a darkness. Dense forests where screams go unheard, remote properties where evidence can be buried beneath snow and ice, and isolated communities where predators can hide in the open. Tonight, across this vast wilderness, ordinary people are about to encounter extraordinary evil. An 18-year-old girl drives through frost-covered streets, believing she's heading to visit friends. A young mother posts her final social media update before vanishing into the mountain darkness. A devoted grandfather tucks his grandson in bed, not knowing these will be their last peaceful moments together. This is the story of 5 dark cases from the Pacific Northwest, where the beauty of the northern country masks some of the most disturbing crimes ever committed. What happens next will reveal how ordinary grudges can explode into unthinkable violence and how evil can flourish in the most unexpected places. This is Northern Crimes. On September 23, 2002, 18-year-old Rachel Burkheimer was lured to a South Everett duplex under false pretenses. What began as deception quickly escalated into hours of torture, culminating in one of Washington State's most brutal crimes. Rachel's murder would expose a web of jealousy, obsession, and calculated cruelty that shocked investigators. In fact, it changed how they viewed the capacity for evil among seemingly ordinary young people. Rachel was from Marysville, known for her outgoing personality and ability to light up any room she entered. Friends described her as someone who could make friends with anyone, a quality that unfortunately made her a target for those who couldn't handle her rejection. The architect of Rachel's murder was her possessive ex-boyfriend, John Diggy Anderson. Friends later testified that Anderson was consumed with jealousy over Rachel's relationships with other men, exploding into violent rages whenever the vivacious teenager rejected his advances. His obsession with controlling Rachel would ultimately cost her everything. On that fateful September evening, Rachel was tricked into coming to the South Everett duplex. What she thought would be a simple visit became a nightmare that would last for hours. According to court testimony, Rachel was beaten, bound, and held hostage in the garage while Anderson and 7 other young men decided her fate. The brutality didn't end there. Rachel was eventually forced into a duffel bag, a detail so horrific that it haunted investigators for years. Maurice Rivas, one of the accomplices who later pleaded guilty, testified about being left alone with Rachel during those final hours. He described unzipping the bag wide enough to talk to her and Rachel's heartbreaking words. If she was going to die that night, she didn't want to be drowned. Instead of showing mercy, Rivas admitted he zipped the bag back up, leaving Rachel trapped and terrified. The group then drove Rachel to Reeder Pit, a popular four-wheeling destination near Gold Bar in the Cascade foothills. There, Anderson ordered accomplices to dig a makeshift grave while Rachel remained imprisoned in the duffel bag. Witnesses testified that Anderson struck the bag with a shovel, quote, like a golf swing, showing the depths of his cruelty. When the grave was finished, Anderson forced Rachel to remove her clothes and jewelry. Someone ripped off the tape she'd been gagged with to avoid leaving fingerprints. Then, in the ultimate act of cowardice, Anderson executed the defenseless teenager. Rivas testified that he heard about 4 shots from the .38 caliber pistol and then watched as Anderson walked toward Rachel until he was practically inside the grave. He fired several more times after the weapon jammed and was cleared. The investigation that followed became one of the largest in Snohomish County history. All 8 men involved were eventually convicted, with Anderson receiving life in prison without parole. The other 7 received sentences ranging from several years to life, depending on their level of involvement. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was how it revealed the group mentality that allowed such brutality to occur. Multiple young men participated in or witnessed Rachel's torture and murder, yet none stepped forward to save her life or report the crime. The case took another dramatic turn years later when John Allen Whitaker, one of the accomplices, won an appeal and received a new trial. But in 2016, he was convicted again, ensuring that Rachel's killers would remain behind bars. Rachel Burkheimer's murder is a disturbing reminder of how jealousy and obsession can escalate into terrifying violence. Her death also highlighted the importance of recognizing warning signs in abusive relationships and the tragic consequences when multiple people choose to be bystanders to evil rather than heroes for justice. On the morning of June 30th, 2014, Jennifer O'Brien arrived at her parents' Calgary home to pick up her 5-year-old son Nathan, who'd spent the night with his beloved grandparents. What she discovered would launch one of Canada's most shocking triple murder cases. The front door was unlocked, blood was spattered throughout the house, and Nathan, along with his grandparents, Alvin and Kathy Lickness, had vanished without a trace. The scene inside the Park Hill neighborhood home was horrific. Blood covered the beds, walls, and floors. Drag marks led to the door, suggesting the victims had been forcibly removed while still alive. A tooth, later identified as belonging to 66-year-old Alvin Lickness, was found among the carnage. Despite the extensive bloodshed, there were no bodies, only the terrifying evidence that something unspeakable had occurred. Jennifer immediately called police. "My family's been murdered, and he's taken the bodies!" An Amber Alert was issued for Nathan, and a massive investigation ensued. The entire nation watched as hundreds of officers searched desperately for the missing family. The breakthrough came when police released surveillance footage of a green Ford F-150 pickup truck seen in the area. The vehicle belonged to Douglas Garland, a 54-year-old man living on his parents' rural property near Airdrie. Garland's own sister, Patty, identified the truck and called police. She was staying at the family farm with her common-law partner, Alan Lickness, Alvin's son. This wasn't a random crime. Douglas Garland harbored a 7-year grudge against Alvin over a failed business partnership. In 2007, Alvin had hired Garland to work on an oil pump patent, but their relationship soured when Garland felt he deserved credit for the innovation. Though the pump never made money, Garland's resentment festered for years. When police searched the Garland property, they uncovered a house of horrors. Inside, they found books titled How to Kill Without Joy and The Death Dealer's Manual, along with disturbing internet searches for, quote, most painful torture, and quote, human dissection. The property contained over a dozen pairs of handcuffs, some child-sized, adult diapers, meat hooks, knives, and a straitjacket. The most damning evidence came from above. On July 1st, 2014, an aerial surveying plane accidentally photographed the Garland farm. The images showed 3 bodies lying face down near outbuildings, 2 adults and 1 small child. When the plane flew over again the next day, the bodies were gone. In a burn barrel on the property, investigators found bone fragments, teeth, jewelry, and a pair of glasses. DNA from all 3 victims was discovered on meat hooks and a hacksaw. The evidence painted a picture of unimaginable brutality. The family had been tortured and dismembered before being incinerated. Garland was arrested on July 14th after violating his bail conditions by returning to the farm. During his 2017 trial, prosecutors revealed the calculated nature of his crimes. He'd researched how to disable the specific lock on the Lickness home, broke in during the early morning hours, and attacked the sleeping family with savage violence. The trial exposed Garland's disturbing background. He'd been kicked out of medical school for cheating, ran a methamphetamine lab, and lived under a stolen identity for 7 years. Mental health experts diagnosed him as mentally ill, but prosecutors argued he was simply evil. On February 16, 2017, Douglas Garland was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 75 years, effectively ensuring he would die behind bars. This case remains one of Canada's most disturbing crimes, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary-seeming grudges can explode into unthinkable violence. In the early morning hours, sometime in March 2020, 24-year-old Paris Laroche stood over her sleeping partner with a hammer in her hand. What happened next would horrify a community and raise disturbing questions about the thin line between victim and perpetrator. This is the story of a woman who claimed self-defense, but whose actions revealed something far more sinister. Paris Laroche had met 32-year-old Sydney Mantee 6 years earlier when she was just 18 years old, working at a fish processing plant in Nanaimo, BC. What began as a workplace romance quickly evolved into what Justice Robin Baird would later describe as a, quote, toxic and profoundly dysfunctional dynamic. It was marked by verbal, emotional, and physical abuse from which neither could peacefully escape. By March 2020, their relationship had deteriorated to the point where they were essentially separated but still living together in the same apartment. Mantee slept on a mattress in the living room while Laroche occupied the bedroom. Neighbors regularly heard a man yelling and a woman crying from their unit, and evidence suggested Laroche had become increasingly isolated from friends and family. The night before the murder, Laroche came home from work to find her cat in distress. The animal had urinated on the floor, was hissing under the bed, and refused to nurse her newborn kittens. Laroche believed Mantee had abused the cat. It was something he'd done before. In fact, this incident would become the final trigger in a relationship already pushed beyond the breaking point. On the morning of March 5th, 2020, Laroche woke early and went about her usual routine, preparing for work at the fish processing plant. As she got ready, she heard the hooting of an owl outside. For reasons she would later struggle to explain, she interpreted this as a sign that the time had come to kill Sydney Mantee. Laroche armed herself with a hammer she'd hidden in the kitchen cupboard, a weapon she claimed to have stashed in case Mantee ever attacked her again. She approached the sleeping man and delivered 3 heavy blows to his head. When she realized the hammer blows hadn't killed him, she cut his throat with a hunting knife she carried on her belt. After calling in sick to work, Laroche began what Justice Baird called a, quote, painstaking and grimly macabre process. Over the course of an entire year, she methodically dismembered Mantee's body, carrying parts in a Ziploc bag in her backpack and disposing of them in various locations around Nanaimo, including the downtown waterfront, city parks, and even a shopping mall bathroom. During this time, Laroche maintained an elaborate deception. She told police and Mantee's mother that he'd simply left town, even as his remains were scattered across the city. When Mantee was reported missing, she participated in the search efforts, all while knowing exactly what had happened to him. The truth finally emerged through an undercover police operation. Officers posed as family members, seeking revenge against Mantee. They alleged he abused their fictitious sister and daughter. Laroche confessed to the killing, describing the murder and dismemberment in a strangely matter-of-fact and sometimes oddly enthusiastic way. She even took police on a tour of disposal sites, showing them where she'd scattered Mantee's remains. DNA testing confirmed that bones recovered from the ocean around Neck Point Park and Piper's Lagoon Park belonged to the victim. At trial, Laroche's defense argued that she'd acted in self-defense, suffering from battered spouse syndrome after years of abuse. However, Justice Baird found that while Laroche may have feared future violence, killing Mantee as he slept wasn't a reasonable self-defense, but rather, quote, an act of fury and vengeance. On January 30th, 2025, Paris Laroche was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 12 years for second-degree murder. On June 16, 2018, 23-year-old Jermain Charlo vanished from Missoula, Montana, becoming the face of a crisis that has plagued Native American communities for generations. A devoted mother of two who regularly documented her life on social media, Jermain disappeared after a night out downtown, leaving behind a mystery that has confounded investigators for over 6 years. Jermain was a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes living on the Flathead Reservation, about 40 miles from Missoula. She was known for her outgoing personality and dedication to her 2 young sons, Jacob and Thomas. Her Aunt Valenda knew something was wrong when Jermain's constant social media activity suddenly stopped. For someone who posted about everything in her daily life, the silence was deafening. On the evening of June 15, 2018, Jermain went to downtown Missoula to socialize at local bars. Security footage from that night shows her outside the Badlander bar around midnight, chatting with people in the alley. Standing behind her in the video is Michael DeFrance, her ex-boyfriend and the father of her 2 children. The footage captures them walking away together just before midnight in what would become the last confirmed sighting of Jermain alive. DeFrance told investigators that he dropped Jermain off at the Orange Street Food Farm around 1 a.m., claiming she was going to stay with a friend named Cassidy who lived nearby. However, detectives could never locate anyone named Cassidy in Jermain's life. The reality was that Jermain had been dating a man named Jacob who lived in that neighborhood, and she planned to stay at his apartment while he was out of town. The relationship between Jermain and DeFrance had been marked by violence and instability. In 2013, DeFrance pleaded guilty to partner or family member assault against Jermain, admitting he'd struck her multiple times with his fist. Despite this documented history of abuse, they continued their turbulent on and off relationship while attempting to co-parent their children. When Jermain failed to return home or contact her family, concern quickly escalated. Her grandmother contacted Valenda, asking if she'd heard from Jermain. The family immediately began searching, calling hospitals and shelters throughout the area. On June 20th, 4 days after Jermain disappeared, Valenda made the drive to the Missoula Police Department to file an official missing person report. The investigation uncovered disturbing evidence regarding Jermain's cell phone. Data analysis revealed the device was active between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m. on June 16th, pinging off a cell tower near Avaro Hill. This rugged, heavily forested area north of Missoula happened to be where DeFrance lived. When confronted with the information, DeFrance changed his account, claiming Jermain had left her phone with him and he couldn't access it. 2 days after Jermain's disappearance, DeFrance admitted to police that he'd disposed of her phone at mile marker 94 on Highway 12 in Idaho. Despite extensive searches of the area, the device was never recovered. Detective Guy Baker, who led the investigation for 6 years, considers this behavior highly suspicious, questioning why someone would discard a missing person's phone if they expected that person to return. The case has become emblematic of the missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis plaguing the region. In Montana, for example, Indigenous persons comprise only 6% of the population, but represent 24% of active missing person cases. Jermain's image now appears on billboards along Highway 93, serving as a constant reminder of the ongoing search for answers. In the quiet suburb of Oregon City, a concrete slab in Ward Weaver's backyard held a horrifying secret. For months, investigators had circled around the 39-year-old man as their prime suspect in the disappearances of two young girls. But it wasn't until August 2002 that the full scope of his crimes would be revealed, exposing a pattern of violence that spanned generations and claimed the lives of 12-year-old Ashley Pond and 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis. Ward Francis Weaver III was born into a legacy of violence. His father, Ward Weaver Jr., sat on death row in California for the brutal murder of a young couple whom he'd kidnapped and buried in his own backyard. The elder Weaver was suspected in up to 24 other murders, establishing a family tradition of predatory behavior that his son would continue with devastating consequences. The younger Weaver's criminal history began early. In 1988, he was convicted of assaulting two teenage girls in California, striking one with a concrete block. After his release, he moved to Oregon, where he would establish himself in the community while harboring dark impulses that would eventually surface with deadly results. Ashley Pond disappeared first, vanishing on January 9, 2002, while walking to her school bus stop. The 12-year-old had previously accused Weaver of attempting to rape her, but no charges were filed. She'd lived with Weaver and his daughter during the summer of 2001, but their relationship soured when she reported his inappropriate behavior. 2 months later, on March 8, 2002, Ashley's friend Miranda Gaddis also vanished under similar circumstances. The 13-year-old was last seen near the same bus stop, just yards from Weaver's home. Both girls were friends with Weaver's daughter and frequent visitors to the house, giving him easy access to his victims. As the investigation intensified, Weaver's behavior became increasingly suspicious. Shortly after Miranda's disappearance, he poured a concrete slab in his backyard, claiming it was a foundation for a hot tub. When questioned by reporters, he stood directly on top of the slab. They were unaware that Ashley's body lay buried beneath his feet in a 55-gallon barrel. The breakthrough came on August 13, 2002, when Weaver was arrested for the attempted rape of his son's 19-year-old girlfriend. During the attack, the victim thought about Ashley and Miranda, convinced that Weaver was going to kill her too. Her survival and testimony would prove crucial to the investigation. Weaver's stepson Francis provided the key evidence that would finally expose the truth. He told investigators that his stepfather had confessed to killing both girls, leading police to obtain search warrants for the property. On August 24, 2002, FBI agents discovered Miranda's remains in a microwave box inside a storage shed behind Weaver's home. The following day brought an even more grisly discovery. Investigators broke through the concrete slab and found Ashley's body buried in the barrel underneath, exactly where the evidence suggested she'd be. The girls had been sexually assaulted and murdered, their bodies hidden on Weaver's property while he maintained his innocence and participated in media interviews. The community's worst fears were confirmed. For 8 months, two families had lived in agony, not knowing what had happened to their daughters. Meanwhile, their killer had been hiding in plain sight, literally standing on their graves, while proclaiming his innocence to television cameras.
So when you walked me over the concrete slab in July, when we did our interview, you had no idea that Ashley Pond's remains were buried underneath it?
None.
In September 2004, Ward Weaver III pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, receiving 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The case highlighted the importance of taking children's allegations seriously and the devastating consequences when predators are allowed to operate within communities. The concrete slab that once concealed Ashley's body became a memorial site where visitors left flowers and teddy bears in remembrance of 2 young lives cut tragically short. The Pacific Northwest is a place of staggering beauty. Towering forests, icy rivers, and mountains that seem unreal. But beneath that beauty runs something much darker. These stories, jealousy, vengeance, and unimaginable cruelty, they aren't just history. They're warnings. Many of the killers are behind bars, yet some cases remain open, and others, like Jermain Charlo's, still echo through the plains. Somewhere out there, the truth waits, buried in snow, hidden by time. And as new mysteries emerge from the shadows of the Northwest, one question lingers. How many more secrets are still waiting to be found?